So good afternoon from London and good morning if you are joining us from America or Canada. Today, welcome to our webinar on adapting to increased risks, cyber and data security in the age of uncertainty. I'm Siobhan Benita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner today, that's Rubric Public Sector. Now, in terms of today's topic, the US federal government, like many other governments around the world, has been concerned with cybersecurity for a long time. Cyber attacks cost governments billions of dollars each year. And the global uncertainty of recent years, including the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, has really highlighted even further the need for governments to boost their cyber resilience. In America, Joe Biden has said that the country now faces a critical moment to improve domestic cybersecurity and bolster national resilience, and has warned that departments and agencies that incremental improvements will not be enough. Instead, he's calling for bold changes and significant investments in order to defend vital institutions. Now, in this webinar, we'll be comparing and contrasting approaches being taken in America and the UK, and we'll look at best practice in cyber security and consider issues like how officials can ensure that their systems and their data are secure, and what some of the stubborn barriers are that still exist to improving cybersecurity. We've got two fantastic speakers with us here today who I'll introduce in a moment. But this is also to say that in this webinar, it's your opportunity to put questions to our two speakers. So whichever device you are using today, you should see on the screen somewhere a Q&A button. Please use that Q&A function at any time from now on to message in your questions. And once we've heard from our speakers, we'll get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of the webinar. So now let me introduce our two speakers. We have Asta Verma, who is Fusion Branch Chief, and that supports the Vulnerability Management Branch under the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Agency, CISA. Asta joined CISA in September 2019 and has since been instrumental in leading Fusion at the strategic and operational levels to build a flexible ecosystem of technology products and services that enable CISA to meet its objectives as outlined by the President and Congress. Before serving in her current role, Asta was a senior solutions architect at Salesforce, where she provided impact-driven solutions for the federal government. Then we go over here to the UK, where we'll hear from Martin Bauer. Martin leads a team of digital security and technology experts in the Central Digital and Data Office at the Cabinet Office, which sits right at the heart of the UK government. Martin works with the National Cybersecurity Centre, the Government Security Group, and digital and cyber teams across the public sector to protect citizens, public servants, and critical government services from both malicious cyber attacks and accidental data breaches. As a co-author of the UK government's cyber security strategy, Martin brings practical technology delivery and security consulting experience to solving even the crunchiest cyber challenges. I'm sure you'll agree we have two fantastic speakers with us here today. As I say, use this opportunity, send in your questions. There's no silly questions, so you can ask anything you like in this webinar. But without further ado, I'm going to invite Asta to give us her opening remarks. Over to you, Asta.
Well, first of all, good morning and good afternoon to all of you that are attending today's webinar. It's really very nice to be able to have this opportunity to share more about my agency. And for those of you that are not familiar with CISA, we are a new agency. We're the newest agency, actually, under the Department of Homeland Security. And we were founded quite recently as well in 2018. If you noticed, I started in 2019. So I came in right sort of as the agency was taking shape. And that's why this has been such an amazing ride, because we have been able to really cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. And as you might imagine, our mission is enormous. and getting more complicated by the day. First of all, I wanted to welcome you all to my kitchen. And this is important because over the last 2-3 years, almost the entire tenure of my career at CISA, I've been in my kitchen, locked down like everyone else in COVID. And remarkably, we've been able to keep pace and keep moving and get our jobs done. And COVID sure definitely hit globally and hit all of us, probably impacted in deep ways. But I think what we learned is to enjoy our technology tools that keep us connected, but recognize that there are risks always. And often in hyper use of technology, you find that those risks go up. And so I think that's what we're living through. I wanted to just mention quickly that the agency is led by Jen Easterly, who is our director of the agency. And we are kind of unique for one thing that we do that's probably very different from other agencies, in that we partner with the private sector. CISA has a very unique relationship with the government in that we are not Department of Defense. People often think of us and they immediately think, DoD. And then a lot of the private sector, quite honestly, is a little afraid, right? They don't necessarily want Big Brother watching, which is always tough to do when you're trying to enforce cyber best practice. How do you do that and not be somebody's big brother watching over them all the time? And this is a balancing act. We do, it says quite artfully, we think, through two primary mechanisms, which I'll spend a little time talking about. One of those affects what is, I would say, the community that we can put some directives towards and expect that they would follow them. And that is uniquely the FCEB. It's the FCEB, which stands for the Federal Civilian Executive Branch of Agencies. And those particular branches of agencies, we have a way to reach them with tools like binding operational directives. When we find that there is a risk and it's an omnipresent risk, it's affecting multiple agencies, we take a look at that risk and we issue a binding operational directive, which typically tells agencies, here's what you should do to protect yourself from this type of, possibility of attack. And so there we are actually able to check and validate whether people are doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as good practices. But even that is a difficult enforcement mechanism. So we get a lot of coverage there, but it all depends on how much the agencies are willing to participate and follow along with those directives. So that's one mechanism. But the other mechanism, which I think is pretty unique and special to CISA, is something called our Cyber Hygiene program. We've had this in existence for a while, and it is a free service that we offer really to anyone that's interested in getting it. And what it allows us to do is to scan their networks with their permission, of course. And this requires a lot of sometimes legalese to be settled between us and them. But the benefit to these firms who sign up for cyber hygiene is that they get a weekly, monthly sort of report card of sorts that says, you all are doing well in these regards, and maybe you're not doing so well in other regards. So this is a way for agencies to use that as a guiding light to change their practices. It also is a guiding light to private firms. And that's where it gets interesting, right? Because to protect the homeland, whether it's the United States or England or the UK or anywhere, you have to have a comprehensive strategy and you have to have comprehensive coverage. And the way we accomplish that is a two-parter. Essentially, we go after the federal civilian executive branch. And if you're familiar with the United States form of government, that's not the entire government. Right? You've still got the legislative branches and you've got the judicial branches. So you can imagine you've got lots to cover there. And then when you talk about the private sector, it's enormous once again. And if you don't have participation from both, you're not protecting the whole of it. You're only protecting part of it, of the entire landscape. One more notable point is that many people think cyber is, they have notions of what it is. They either picture, hackers sitting in some back thing, or they picture some, high stakes warfare going on behind the scenes. And it's really none of that. It's a fractured landscape of many kinds of actors. And you are well advised to protect yourself all the ways that you can. And some of those protections are quite basic. If we just build the discipline and the muscle memory to do them periodically, basic things like patching, basic things like understanding how phishing campaigns work, which is 2/3 of the time, if not 90% of the ways people get in to getting to those secure assets. So we can certainly talk much more about that. I wanted to mention those few things about the agency. My role is unique in that all of the operations that we do in CISA, which is everything from scanning, like I just mentioned under cyber hygiene. It's also field forces that go out and do what we call assessments, vulnerability assessments against critical infrastructure. So think oil and gas, pipelines, ports, every kind of ports, airports, shipping ports, space ports, if you can believe it, that's where we're heading now. So we cover both the physical side and the network side. And that's through both automated remote assessments, as well as on-site, what we call more intrusive red teams, purple, blue team type assessments. And to do that securely and safely, especially as you adopt cloud technologies, you have to be quite buttoned up in your practices around data and how you treat sensitive data in particular. So for us, PII, PCII, making sure that we are absolutely protecting those very essential assets of our customers is important throughout the agency for what we do. And my job is to provide those platforms, secure platforms that are have gone through the security checks, have gone through what we call our authority to operate procedures, which is very comprehensive mechanisms of protecting your systems. And that's how we're able to perform as an agency much of our operations. So I'll stop and pause there because that's probably a lot. And I'm happy to dig into much more on all of the things that are really popular nowadays. And when I say popular, I mean things like ransomware, which is everywhere in the news, and phishing and so forth. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Esther. As you say, loads there in those first remarks that we're going to dig into, I think, and unpick later. So some of the things that struck me, just as you say, the enormity of your mission, especially for a new kind of organization. You mentioned there are a couple of the mechanisms that you use. So whether it's those kind of binding operational directives or the cyber hygiene program, which sounds like it's something that everybody would want to take up. Why wouldn't you want to take that up? But also, I think some of the challenges, which I think will resonate with the audience, and maybe Martin, this will resonate with you as well, just the kind of the need for a comprehensive strategy, because if everything isn't covered, then there's vulnerabilities there. So, you need that whole comprehensive strategy. And something we'll definitely come back to, I think, in the questions I want to pick up on this is the need for everybody to understand even the very basic things that they should be doing in this kind of landscape. What is it that as an official, a kind of public servant, you should be doing yourself? And then definitely the issue of security of data will come up again, and we'll dig into that in the conversation. So thank you so much for setting the scene from CISA's point of view. Martin, I'm coming over to you now.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Okay, well, we've been introduced to Aster's kitchen. So welcome to what most people across the UK public sector think is my sauna. It is not a sauna, it's actually a log cabin. But it's interesting, right? It was the opening remarks were about things like working from home. That changed things a bit. In fact, I was one of the people who was called in and told, you realise that after the weekend, the whole of the British government and the whole of Britain is going to be told, work from home. Sort that out. Make sure the government doesn't collapse. That was an interesting weekend. But you know what? It was an opportunity as well for us, because we had struggled in the UK public sector to sort out video conferencing for about 8 years, and it had been stuck because security. And then in a week, we fixed it so that now across the whole public sector, you can use the main video conferencing tools and it just works. It just works. So COVID was an appalling situation, but actually adapting to changes in context can really help us do good security and actually enable good working. So right, I'm Martin Bowyer of the Cabinet Office, which you can think of as being the kind of corporate centre of the UK government. I'm a co-author of the UK government cybersecurity strategy, as well as transformational work. My days are filled with all manner of crazy cyber themes, from how to secure common instant messaging tools and apps to providing technical skunk works in response to major incidents. It keeps me very busy. I lead 3 highly talented and creative teams of tech and cyber experts with the mission to protect citizens, public servants, and the digital services we all rely on. In the introduction, Siobhan said that we work alongside the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is the UK's version of CSER, roughly speaking, and another bit of Cabinet Office that looks after the whole security of the government. And within the 3 of us, we kind of form a triumvirate that are the cyber centre of government. So we see it all, So following Alistair's thoughts, I'm going to talk about 3 things which are more about how you implement good cybersecurity in government. The first is that the UK is the same, only different. The second is going to be about Defenders 1, and the third is about Secure by Design. So I'm here to provide a comparative point of view. So I thought I'd start thinking about the differences between the cyber and data sharing challenges in the US versus the UK. But it turns out we have more similarities than differences. So let's consider them. I'm going to start with the threat and threat actors. That's pretty much the same. Nation states, organized crime, activists, disgruntled insiders. It's the same either side of the Atlantic. You may have seen in the last year, we've had attribution happening, official attribution, both from CSER, NCSC. That's new, right? We never used to say it was the Russians because we thought that would have negative consequences. But now attribution is part of our world. The other interesting thing, though, about threat is that changes in threat have much less impact than you might think. Because frankly, we only need one highly motivated and capable threat actor to get lucky to have a major incident. The second similarity is the technology. The spectrum of tech that we use is very similar. We both have kind of cutting edge cloud-based microservice architectures. We have software as a service, either served up vanilla or modified to the very edge of the definition of SaaS. And we've both got legacy services that haven't kept up with technology change, haven't been continually improved, and defended against modern cyber threats. Because we have the same tech, we have the same vulnerabilities, which is very much us as well. There's a reason why CSER and NCSC have started issuing joint vulnerability warnings. It's logical, right? Same tech, same vulnerabilities, differing impacts depending on where the tech's used. The last similarity I'll draw on is senior interest and traction. So I spent, along with others, the last 3 years driving the cyber agenda up to the most senior levels of government. Our adversaries have been extremely helpful in providing a whole swathe of high-profile incidents, which really does help our business case. And I think our leaders on both sides now understand that there is a thing called cyber risk. It's expensive and difficult to mitigate, and it needs investment. All right, so much for similarities. What about differences? The structure and power base is different. Our public sector is arranged differently to yours. That changes the levers we have to drive improvements in cyber posture, and understanding those levers and how to operate them, often by remote control, occupies quite a lot of our time and energy. We don't have executive orders. It's not really the British way. Having said that, I will admit that we do look upon the executive orders with a certain degree of jealousy, because having a direct order mechanism that overrides most other considerations would be a really powerful tool in our arsenal. However, like all power tools, you can cut off your own legs with it. So it's definitely to be used with care. So if I can't order someone to do something, I have to use evidence, persuasion, and diplomacy to achieve my aims. And you need to find the right person to talk to. We do have a stronger mechanism for cyber assurance across government, at least across central government. And you can read more about that in the UK government cybersecurity strategy if you feel so inclined. Scale is different. Whilst I think that the complexity of our problem space is very comparable, we certainly have fewer resources to throw at it. So we find ourselves in a position where we have to brutally prioritize, and we have to continually look for an edge that keeps us ahead of adversaries and contributing to the cross-Atlantic partnership. And I think our culture is different as well. I mean, it sounds like stereotyping, but people's attitudes and motivations do come from a different place. So things like national pride and loyalty work very differently here. Now, that doesn't particularly bother me. It just means I need to empathize with people I need to influence and understand what motivates and inspires them. The final difference I'm going to draw upon is that we've built a concept of functions in the UK that reach across government. So I belong to our digital and data function, and I have a lot of colleagues who I work with in the security function. Clearly, cyber sits slightly uncomfortably in the middle of that Venn diagram. But what it means is I have reach and influence and a mandate to work across pretty much any public sector organization. That's really important. Now, you've got something similar to that. You've got the US Digital Service, but that's closer to our government digital service concept. It's more about going in and helping people build good services and great services, and slightly less about being a functional center. So the differences give us a different problem landscape to the US. It's not entirely surprising that the focus of our solutions is different, even if the real meat and tech content is actually very similar. Crude comparison. You wrote an executive order. By comparison, I had to work hard across my network of relationships to gain agreement to have a single government cybersecurity strategy. When we wrote it, it had to be written collaboratively by all the main stakeholders, CSC, different bits of Cabinet Office, the CISOs across government. We brought in an industry panel and international partners. We had to have our devolved administrations involved, so Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And we had to tie it to the money. We had to tie it to the money from the Treasury, because money talks, money talks. And if we hadn't done those things, it would have become immediately meaningless shelfware. So it'll be really interesting, I think, to see which delivers better strength in the long term. So there's a lot of good stuff in the strategy. You can go and read it, and the link I think has been posted. But I'm going to briefly touch on two themes that I think are as relevant to you in the US as they are to us in the UK. The first one is about defend as one. So fragmentation is one of our adversary's best friends. It restricts our ability to detect and manage vulnerabilities, identify anomalous behavior, share information about detected attacks, and coordinate our response. How many of you have people in your organization who, when they're faced with a significant cyber attack, are stood there going, I feel very alone right now? That's not defend as one. So we have to move at the speed of the adversary. We have to have the agility to anticipate where and how they're going to attack us next, so that we can bang the door shut in their little virtual faces. If it takes us 2 weeks to find all the instances of a vulnerability, that's 2 weeks of opportunity for it to be exploited. If we contain an attack in one organization, we have to shut down the window in others faster than the attacker's ability to shift focus. Defend as one is a mindset, and it's also a set of capabilities that helps us do it. So we're building a government cyber coordination center to share, consume, and analyze threat and incident data, and to rapidly identify, investigate, and coordinate the response to incidents alongside threat and vulnerability reporting. What about people? It's going to be staffed with experts from the current sort of cyber teams we have across the centre, but critically, we're going to bring in secondees from across the public centre, rotating them in and out again. They're going to build skills and relationships that we can lean on as a wider virtual team in our responses, and they'll cascade that out across the public sector. I am very excited about this. Imagine that virtual team, the whole public sector, that can mobilize as one to face each new threat. That's really powerful. Each individual technology and cyber team member should feel like they have a personal responsibility to work alongside their colleagues wherever they are to tackle threats. That's defend as one. But we can dramatically reduce the number of incidents by getting better at building our services with security in mind from the outset. And this is secure by design. So the government relies on a range of technologies to operate and deliver services. Each one has its own set of cyber risks which need to be managed throughout the life cycle. We've got a big data sharing agenda in the UK public sector, but inconsistent application of security to our services is often a massive challenge to overcome when we want to share data between organizations. Therefore, I think it's pretty obvious that you need a common approach to secure by design. A framework that ensures that all technology and digital services are planned, procured, designed, built, operated, modified, and decommissioned securely. That enables them to be consistently, continuously assured against good practice and robust standards. Now, it's not good enough to just adopt this in government. We also need our suppliers to build it this way. So we started with the NCSC's published material on secure by design principles, which there we go, the principles have been posted to you. And we're now building out from that with contributors from across the public sector. We're also putting together an industry panel to make sure that what we do is sensible and applicable to the services that they provide. And you'll see all of the big names, certainly in international services, digital services on there, as well as some sort of like niche ones from the UK. So secure by design tackles fragmentation. It makes sharing data securely easier, and it helps us dynamically manage and assure risk across the whole life cycle of a service. I'm going to leave with two final thoughts. The first is, we can't manage current cyber risk environment by lurching from one crisis to the next. Ultimately, we have to make strategic investments to mitigate the risk to an acceptable level. And that is the same on both sides of the Atlantic. The final observation I'm going to make is about people. So lots of people talk about the importance of people in managing cyber risk, and that's right on the money. But there's a caution, and this is more aimed at the technical leaders in this audience. The NCSC's Ian Levy, who's kind of UK cyber royalty, if you've not heard of him, he likes to say that if we are pinning the survival of our entire organisation on the hope that every single user will spot and avoid every single malicious link in every phishing email, and that clicking that link causes the whole digital edifice to collapse around our ears, we've probably engineered it wrong. We need to educate our people. We need to make security easy and frictionless, or as frictionless as possible. But we also need to stop punishing our people for making honest mistakes, or we won't learn and we won't fix the basic issues. And that, I think, is the essence of secure by design. Siobhan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Martin. Really interesting, because this is about the compare and the contrast. So really interesting to hear what you said about the similarities, some of those shared kind of common threats. Might come back to what you said there about attribution and why we've started to do that. That would be interesting for your thoughts on that. Similar in terms of the technology that's available in the two different countries to tackle this, but also those legacy systems and some of the challenges there in modernizing those. But then really interesting to hear about the differences, both in terms of kind of structures, resources, but also culture, because I think culture's a really important part of this. And then those two things, just for Asta, I know you were having technical gremlins there, but just Martin was talking about kind of his Defend as One program. So everybody sense that you're all in this, helping each other. You have to have that, as you mentioned, that strategic kind of approach. The pace issue I want to come back on, Martin. How can we really be as fast as the attackers? That's a question I want to pose in a moment. And then that idea of secure by design. So everything that we do going forward, security has to be designed in, not an add-on. And coming back to people, this is all about people at the end of the day. So thank you to both of you. Thank you, Asta. I hope you can hear us now.
Yes, quick sound check. I just want to make sure, apologies, I guess Zoom is a bit of a bandwidth.
Thank you for persisting. I think we got glimpses of your entire house there as you got back, so not just the kitchen. But thank you to both of you, because I think you've raised so many issues there. To the audience, please do send in some questions, but I want to, I think, pick up on two things in terms of what you've said. So one was this issue, just to get it out of the way, because this has come up in different webinars before, this issue of hybrid working and working from home. So for some people, I think there are security concerns now, as people are kind of setting up their own offices at home, using their own laptops, maybe different kind of setup. Are there new vulnerabilities now in a kind of hybrid future? And is that part of the basic kind of things that officials should be worrying about and mitigating? But secondly, Martin, just coming back on your point about agility and pace, are we always going to be playing catch up to the attackers? Are they always going to be faster than us? And in reality, does the public sector have the resources it needs to be as fast as it needs to be? I think you're going to have to go solo for a while until Asta comes back and join. No, there's Asta again. So I don't know if you heard the second part. Asta was about agility, and can the public sector ever be as fast as it needs to be, or are we always going to be playing catch up? So Martin, I'll let Asta just settle down. I'll come to you first on the kind of both hybrid working and the need for pace?
Okay, so I was lucky enough to be at the heart of that. How on earth do we do this hybrid working thing in the UK? So there are different aspects to it. Once you've sorted out the kind of basic physical, oh, hang on, who can wander past here and just look at my screen? Right, we can fix those kinds of problems. They're easy. The second challenge we have is about how our digital infrastructure is engineered. Now, actually, organizations that really kept up with technology were already there, right? So if I think about my organization, we were working from home already, bits and pieces, so it wasn't a massive deal. Some organizations had to make a lot of investment very fast in the infrastructure, particularly things like VPN infrastructure, so that they could get their people working from home properly. There was a lot of re-engineering going on because people found that with a lot of services, particularly given that we built and upgraded about 250 new services, digital services, to cope with the pandemic. What we found was a lot of our frontline services have really had this implicit assumption in it that the people delivering them, the people operating those services, would have been sat in an office while they were doing it. So things like anti-fraud controls were reliant on the fact that people would be wandering past all the time, so you wouldn't be shunting large amount of cash here, there, and everywhere. So you have to rethink that. But if you thought through your technology properly, working from home should not dramatically increase your attack surface. We worked a lot with Microsoft and with Google to look at things like architectures, things like bring your own device and produce good, better, best configuration guidance. That's published, so you can go read that. Microsoft and Google both did it, and we endorse it. So that's one way of sort of starting to shut that down. I think we've become a lot more permissive about what we can do from home, and that's helpful, right? Because it makes people take a bit more personal responsibility for managing their own cyber risk. Are we going to shut down the risk, particularly where we're talking about unmanaged bring your own device, which I hate, where someone's gone and downloaded a load of dodgy stuff and has a machine that's riddled with stuff and then is logging onto official systems? We're not going to close down those risks until we really get on top of behaviors and we start thinking about how we do BYOD and managed device control. But actually, in the main, hybrid working should not result in a dramatic increase in cyber risk. Controversial statement, but I'll put it out there.
Thanks, Martin. Before we get on to the agility point then, Asta, your thoughts on hybrid working. Do you agree with what Martin has said there?
Absolutely. And I do apologize for all of the challenges. It's funny how we just did a dry run and everything was fine, and then game time, these things happen. But that is technology. That's the nature of technology. Yeah. And I think I'll just use that to make the point. Going back to the earlier point made, one recent change for CISA is that we were given new authorities. And this is significant. For those of you that know the space well, then one of the challenges we have is in getting the private sector to open up to us. We don't have a mechanism to enforce them to share or to evidence things to us. So really all we can do is provide incentive up until now. But the new authorities allow us to do things like, exactly to your point, when you have home internet, you don't necessarily know who is behind your provider, right? All you have, in many cases for us, all we can do is reach the ISP. We cannot go further. We cannot probe deeper to see who's actually behind that ISP. And so for us, we could only look so far. Our X-ray vision didn't go far enough. And so the new authorities allow us to do some of that, right? Especially to protect ourselves, to Martin's point, do it by design so that we are watching out for the risk even as we enter into these equations. That's hard to do when you're playing catch up. If you go back to the beginning of cyber, I mean, when did these problems get introduced? They didn't just emerge. They've been there latent in the systems that we've built from the beginning. And that's the problem. When these were designed in the beginning, 30, 40 years ago, we were not thinking that malicious actors would behave these ways. We were designing these systems with the belief that people would always be using them in the right ways and not anticipating the wrong ways. And now here we are with this patchwork Tetris network that we've got, which is why I don't call it the World Wide Web. I call it the Wild, Wild West, because you don't know what you're walking into. And there could be landmines basically everywhere. Every topology of a corporate or agency network has, it's like Swiss cheese. There's a ton of holes in there. And your best bet is to follow the basic principles. Again, what Martin was talking about, the personal ownership of responsibility. It is on some level on us as IT staff or even at home to make sure that we're patching our systems, looking out for phishing emails. Those are the basic things. And also being careful about where we are buying and sourcing our software. You will hear a lot about SBOM. And SBOM stands for Software Bill of Materials. And if you've been in the manufacturing world, you're used to BOMs, Bill of Materials, where you knew everything that went into the construction of whatever. And when it was hardware, you knew where your bolt, your screw, your pin, whatever, where they came from. In the world of cyber, you don't. When you assemble software, you might be using pieces, parts of other people's code. There could be bugs in that code. You might be reusing it. There could be all sorts of ways that backdoors get introduced. And we have to get into a better practice, not just of solving and fixing and patching what we've already got from the Swiss cheese that we live with. We also have to make sure we don't introduce new Swiss cheese by allowing new software that hasn't been built the right way to enter the ecosystem. And I think that is hard because you need industry to participate in that effort. And you need them to be self-evaluated in that effort on some level. And here in the United States, we struggle with having the ability to enforce anything along those lines. It's almost always volunteer participation, and you have to incentivize the adoption, the engagement, and that sometimes can be the challenge.
So picking up on that, I will come back to this issue of pace and agility in a minute, but picking up on what you've both said there then about kind of taking personal responsibility for kind of your area, the systems you're using. Just thinking about people who are in the audience, maybe some people don't know where to start even in terms of doing this. So one, what would your advice be to them? But secondly, to what extent do we in America and the UK even have a sense of how compliant we are overall in our systems and how much there is still to do? And do we even have the resources available to carry out that kind of mapping exercise on compliance? Martin, I'll come back to you on that one.
That's a massive question. First thing I'll say is from what Asta said and the inability to see back, my observation is, so we've been pushing the mantra, protect the data, not the network, for a few years now, because you just can't rely on the network. If you look at the way that routing works, it's hilarious how much can be routed around and how you can influence that stuff. So, yeah. So, personal responsibility to the individual. So I do not expect end users in departments and arm's body and cops on the street and things like that. I do not expect them to know, oh, right, crikey, I better figure out whether my VPN's actually working here. What's my whois information? Can I see who I actually am? Right, forget that, that's not going to work. Each organization has to be really clear to its users about what they do expect of them, right? And it's reasonable to expect people to follow a proper patching regime, right? Because if they're really using a corporate machine, it should say, you need to patch this. It should just happen, right? Or even better, it just happens as it has been patched, it's going to reboot, so just reboot. There are certain behaviors we need to be really clear on. So things like your acceptable use policy need to be really clear on it. You might have specific policies about locations that people work in. So make it simple for the user. Which includes, by the way, things like multi-factor authentication, right? Way to stop 80% of the commoditized attacks, multi-factor authentication. All right, it's a bit of user friction because they've got to have a phone or a device or a YubiKey. But actually, if you can get people over that and make them understand why it's important, you can close down a lot of risk very quickly. So it has to be specific. As tech leaders, we have to engineer things to make that easy for the users, right? And only then do we have the situation where, or the conditions under which my statement of it shouldn't be that much more risky to work from home is actually true.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I'll come back to you because you haven't answered the thing about compliance yet.
Oh, okay, all right.
Compliance. But Asta, this point of personal responsibility and how can people even know what they should know? Where do they even start?
You know, this is such a tough question because it has to do with educating the wide audience. And the wide audience maybe thought, you know, cyber lived in the world of the esoteric, it didn't touch them. But if you look at the stats, if you look at ransomware, it's not necessarily just hitting the big guys. It's hitting the little guys, right? Because the ransomware people have figured out, if I do 1,000 of these a day for a small dollar, it's better. I'll have better luck than going after a big enterprise who's got lots of budget to thwart me, Mr. Bad Actor or Miss Bad Actor. But as a small, shop somewhere out in the Midwest, may not have a lot of IT staff, you're an easy target. I lock you up, you pay me $1,500, and I do 10 of those a day, and I'm making a good living. There is no way to protect those folks unless they are self-aware on some level. And that self-awareness we have to generate. And we have to generate that by getting people to understand the risks that they're surrounded by. And that's on every device, not just their work devices. We just think about work, but it's in your whole life. It's in your smartphones and your devices and your iWatches and your trackers that you wear, right? All of those are risks. Every IoT device you have in your house is a risk, right? The Wi-Fi LAN that you're using is a risk. Everything is a risk. Now, that's intimidating to people. And to Martin's point, if you look at it like a big elephant, you don't know where to take the bite. But if you do some very basic, simple things, it's amazing how effective they are. Patch your system periodically. I mean, come on, that's like brushing your teeth. If you just did that, you'd stop a whole bunch of them right on the spot. Now, that's said in cavalier fashion. The reality is many of our infrastructure, physical structures are written on systems that were hardened. And if you try to patch them, you're going to break down the entire system, the factory, the power plant. You can't patch those systems. So this is, again, where this gets tough. How do you go back to protect those systems that were built ground up with these weaknesses? And that's why we do those on-site assessments. We try to prepare them best we can. We look for ways and strategies to upgrade them, do a technology transition, migration. But on the personal front, yeah, we should be watching out for basic things like, when your computer says patch my system, patch your system. Or when you see an email that looks suspicious, recognize that there is something called phishing. And what does it do and how does it work? Just protect yourself by not clicking on certain emails. These are very basic staple things that would stop at least 50%. But we're not even there yet. It's kind of like when seatbelts didn't get adopted for the longest time until people saw crash test dummies get mutilated. And then once they saw that, they started adopting the practice. So I think it has to maybe hit more personally before people take action, which is unfortunate. But it's already getting to that point.
There probably is a very basic kind of education and communication exercise needed across kind of departments and agencies, so everybody knows those basic kind of things. I am going to come back to, just to remind us, the audience, please do send your questions in. We've had some questions in advance. So one of them was this issue of compliance. So how do you, looking across kind of, I'm talking now about looking across departments and agencies in the public sector, how do they know where their weaknesses are, and how can you check whether they're complying with the new things that you would like them to do? In a world where we have to recognize resources are really tight and priorities are always changing. So this month, it might be that we're all talking about cybersecurity, but next month they might all be told to focus on climate change and ESG. So how do you get around this, and how do we actually make sure that we even understand where all the vulnerabilities are? Martin, I'll come back to you first.
Yeah, okay. I'm really sorry. I'm going to go slightly back on what something else said.
Yeah, sure.
3 years ago, if I'd said to the education sector, you need to harden yourselves against ransomware attack, they'd have looked at me and gone, what? Who would attack us with ransomware? Don't be ridiculous. And yet, we've seen schools get done over in the UK. Same with local authorities. So context changes all the time, right? Context changes all the time. Compliance, right? So, oh man, you could write a thesis on this. So in the UK, we have, at the moment, we use something called minimum cybersecurity standards, which is essentially a set of controls. It's a bit NIST, it's a bit ISO 27002E. And it just says, are you doing these things, yes or no? And departments are required to make a return on that once a year. And they have to answer questions like, have you got better than you were last year in terms of that compliance? It's a good start, but it's fundamentally flawed because it's very binary. You either do it or you don't. Now, anyone with any kind of reasonably complex IT estate is going to go, it depends. It depends. So what we're doing as part of the cyber strategy is we're moving to something a bit more advanced. So we've got a program called GovAssure, which is putting in place a new framework for doing cyber assurance and compliance. It's a bit less, I don't like the word compliance, it's more assurance. It is based on the cyber assessment framework, the NCSC cyber assessment framework called CAF. You can go and read about it. I'll find you the link in a bit. And that is really based on understanding your services, your critical services and the critical things you have, and then looking at the spectrum of controls that are actually in use against it. And the other thing we're introducing there is a mandatory independent audit of your return. So if you're a government department, if you're a significant arm's-length body, you will have to look at that. You'll have to understand what your key assets are, understand what your key services are, and report against it. And someone's going to check that work. And we will then look at that information in the centre and work out where the right areas of investment are, because it comes down to prioritising investment, right? Prioritizing investment. So it's an acknowledgement. You're never going to get it ticks across the board. Anyone who shows me ticks across the board, I'll tell them they're lying. But it is about making sure you're investing in the right place to mitigate the biggest risks and taking the right bite out of the elephant.
Thanks, Martin. So Asta, this bite of the elephant, my understanding in America, and I think Martin, you referred to this as well. So you've got your president's executive order, which requires people, as I understand it, to do certain things. But kind of how are you measuring compliance against that? What's the process?
The thing is, the language is written so abstractly, right? And it's up to us to provide the measures that say that we've met that abstract principle. And this is the challenge. This is one of the areas that CISA right now is trying to redefine itself. Up until now, we've been the nation's risk advisor. And that risk advisor is sort of a, hey, we should be watchful for this. Hey, we should be watchful for that, right? Now we are actually being told by Congress and the president and given greater authorities for a reason, because they want us to be more than advisors. They want us to be actual risk reducers. And what that means is there has to be some measurable mitigation, measurable gains made and measurable mitigation of the risk we perceive. Problem is the risk is going up every day. So how do you catch up and mitigate it on top of that? And I'll tell you right now, CISA is still trying to make sure we are well positioned to be that risk reduction agency. It's really hard to accomplish that goal because you don't even know what your target is and what you're trying to reduce necessarily. So living in a very fuzzy world, it's kind of like what Martin said. You have to take a multi-pronged strategy, and that's what we've done. At least for us, compliance. I agree with Martin 100%. That's a strong word. In our world, we can't get compliance. We don't have the authorities to do it. But we can get assurance. And again, it's mostly done by incentivizing and getting people to self-adopt, self-regulate, self-motivate. And that's the hard part. But what we want to do is not be punitive in the way we come down on people by handing them a report card that looks nasty every month and says, you're in trouble, you didn't do X, Y, or Z. That's a terrible thing to get everyone every month in your mailbox that says you have failed X, Y, or Z. You're red, red, red. What we want to become instead is the advocate for those folks, right? To say, hey, we're with you. We're going to help you with this. You're not out here alone trying to fight this battle on your own. We're going to give you tools. We're going to give you knowledge. We're going to give you places you can go to create a community around some of your challenges. And that's where you're seeing things like cyber insurance show up, and small businesses are banding together because they can't fight it by themselves. They're fighting it together as consortiums, which is smart. That's kind of what I call organic movement of the base towards self-recognition of their problems that can't necessarily be addressed directly by anybody. No local law enforcement, no agency has that kind of jurisdiction. But our cyber hygiene program stands out as sort of the banner flagship product from CISA that has proven its value time and time again. And cyber hygiene is what we call it. It's actually a portfolio of services. I believe somewhere in my slide deck it's there. And also we can drop some links into the CISA page that describes these services in detail. As I said, they are free. You have to sign up. And you do have to allow us to look at your networks, which means you're going to give us some of your information, right? We have to have that in order to do what we do. But it's free. and you get it, it's in your inbox, and it contains a lot of useful information for how to protect yourself. First of all, it's not just one service, it's a set of services. I'll just quickly outline a couple of them. Folks can read up and ask me more if they have questions. We have basic, what we call vulnerability scanning. Have you patched your system, and what's your ports? Do you have any ports that are open, etc. We also have phishing, continuous phishing campaigns that we are always running to try to help customers better themselves. We have something called web app scanning, where you're literally making sure that your web interfaces, and the applications you're using have a degree of protection there. And we're doing something called posture and exposure, which is, again, a little bit more oriented towards the bridge between physical and what we call our network security. We still haven't touched on data, which is like the other big giant elephant in the room, but that's just, the physical structures, if you will, that are going to allow the transport of data to flow. And the data is a whole other animal altogether.
So just to say to the audience, we're sending out links, and you should see that in the chat function that you've got. So as Martin and Asta are referring to things, we're sending out the links, and we'll make sure we resend those to everybody who's joined as well after the event. I just want to check something with you then, Asta, just to confirm for the audience. The Hygiene program, is that available for government departments and agencies as well as private sector partners? That's
why it's powerful. It is a program open to both. And we right now, I believe it's a 1/3, 2/3 split between our distribution. So it's 1/3 for seeing private sector participation, 2/3 from our SN and other agencies. We want to reverse that, right? We want it to be at least 50-50, or recognize that the private space is much larger than the public space. And so we'd love to get more coverage there. And so we're actively engaged right now in recruiting more folks to participate in that program. And I'm happy to tell you that in the last year, since COVID, and I'll tell you one other driver, is our election cycle. That's no secret to the world what we've gone through over the last several years in this regard. And so CISA actually became quite the agency only a couple of years ago in the limelight, because we were the agency to certify the election. They came out boldly and said so, and put our reputation and stake in the line, in the ground to make that claim. And since then, the private sector has paid attention to us more. And that media coverage did us benefit in that we were able to penetrate further and get out to the audience wider. And we're, seeing participation go up, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, that raising awareness. So we've had a question come in advance, and it goes back to your agility point, Martin, and the kind of pace issue. And this was somebody's asked, given the speed with which kind of criminal actors are able to pivot and kind of exploit different situations, how realistic is it to expect governments to be able to stay ahead of changing cyber threats? And I want to add to that question as well, something that, is this an issue of maybe in the private sector, you've got more kind of specialists who understand kind of data and technology and IT things more than in the government side of things, because you can't pay as much, for example. So is that part of the issue that maybe means that the public sector struggle to keep up and can't operate fast enough? Martin, over to you.
Ooh, that's a punchy point, the last one. Actually, I come across as many experts and quite a lot of the time deeper experts in the public sector than I do in the private sector. Secondly, we're getting increasing mobility between public and private sector in our digital and data technology specialists. That's not what stops us being agile. So there are 2 or 3 things it's worth thinking about around agility. The first is your mindset, right? If you sit there stuck in a past mindset and you're worried about compliance, you are never going to be agile enough to keep up with an adversary. You have to think like an adversary. So one of the things I always encourage across the teams that I see is think like an adversary. Just do it. If you don't know how to think like an adversary, we'll teach you how to think like an adversary. Enough of us have done it. So think like an adversary. If you think like an adversary, the chances are you're going to be more agile, because you're not going to say, well, I'm only going to look at this because this is my stovepipe. going to go, what about this over here? Oh, have a look at that. I wonder if we can find that. I have a team who've done that, who've basically found 120 new types of vulnerability before anyone else has. That's kind of cool, right? The third thing is that you can only react fast if you prepare well, right? And anyone who's ever done any cyber incident response will know that. The more preparation you do around knowledge and understanding of what you've got, the systems, the services, how to log into them, what looks right, what doesn't look right, the more preparation you do, the more agile you'll be in response, because you won't be looking at it going, how do I get into that again? Why am I seeing that? What's that log? Is that supposed to be happening? So prepare, think like an adversary, and actually empower your teams. Don't rely on some kind of crazy decision-making structure that means you've got to go up to a director level to make a decision to actually take a containment action. Yeah. Empower the teams, let them get on with it.
Yeah, thanks. Asta, your thoughts on how the public sector can get ahead of some of these attacks? Oh, I think Asta might have gone off for a while. While we wait for Asta to rejoin, Martin, I'm going to ask you another question that's come in, and actually it links to data. So this issue of kind of data sharing. So lots of governments are going through digital transformation programs and are linking up departments and agencies in ways that they haven't done before, wanting to share data to improve citizen, outcome for the citizens and improve public services, more joined up public services. But to what extent then does that create new vulnerabilities and increase kind of cyber risk? Because that's all about sharing different data sets in ways that hasn't been done before.
Yeah. So it doesn't strictly increase cyber risk. However, you do introduce a risk of unintentional, two risks. Firstly, you introduce the risk of unintentional consequences. When you start to bang data sets together, quite interesting things happen, particularly if you haven't engineered stuff properly to start with. So you need to think about what are all the adverse use cases if I share this data across multiple organizations, or where I put the data into a central pool and then I want other organizations or enable other organizations to start pulling and doing analysis on it. So that's something that the ONS, the Office of National Statistics in the UK, have done a lot of work on, because that's kind of their mission. The second thing is you have to get over the idea that that you control your own data when it passes out of your hands. Your responsibility doesn't end, but what you can't do is build a bastion around your ownership of the data. So you need to assure yourself that the controls and the management of that information is robust where it goes. That means you need to be really clear on the risks you have to manage when you're going out and doing it. You can't just go, here's a dumb list of controls. Are you doing this or not?
Yeah.
I won't sugarcoat it. It's actually really tough, particularly the unintended consequences thing. But the more we think about it, the more we actually try this stuff out and think intelligently about the risks, the safer we will be as we start doing that data sharing. Yeah. There are lots of ways we can mitigate risk, anonymization, tokenization, things like that. The worst case scenario is you just dumbly do it without really thinking about what the consequences are. Yeah. But security is not there to get in the way of government delivering great services, right? We're there to enable it. So we have to start with that mindset.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Asta, I don't know if you caught any of that, but I want to ask your thoughts on the kind of speed issue. So how can we keep ahead of the attackers? And then I'll give you the question on data sharing that Martin just answered.
Sure. So the speed issue, I agree with Martin. If you're not prepared, then you can't respond fast. And for us, that means simple things like disaster recovery backups. If people backed up their system, simple things like that, then when you do have a critical incident like ransomware happen, you're not stuck in the water for days trying to sort your network out. What you simply do is flush your current arrangement and pop back your disaster recovery backups that you do, and then you're back in business, right? And then what you do is you essentially thwart the entire chain of risk that comes with ransomware. You shut it down. And what's nice about that is whatever backdoors were established by that actor, you might be able to get rid of those by patching your systems and bringing them back up, right? So you've essentially now afforded future forward activity too. So it again comes down to knowing what to do when an incident happens. Part of the education piece of this and the speed piece of this is when you're struck with something, you don't necessarily know where to begin to start fixing what you broke or what broke. And to have a well-articulated disaster recovery plan that says, okay, when we get hit with this, first thing we're going to do is make sure our data is protected. We're going to shut down, any access to our data systems, or we're going to disconnect them, or make sure that the IP tunnels we set up are all gone, right? That's first measure to do under attack. Or any time that you observe any kind of activity that seems anomalous, that you're not just letting it sit, right? You're actively kind of prosecuting what's going on. But again, it comes down to having a fairly simple tool belt of tools. It does not take sophistication to fight cyber. And I think the speed piece of it has to do with us allowing our audience to know what tools they have to protect themselves, because we cannot get there to every point in every situation fast enough. There's no way, we just cannot scale that fast. So we are trying to do that again through cyber hygiene, but we're also trying to do that by putting out bad practices. And what we have is a regular disclosure program that goes out to the public and says, these are the new vulnerabilities we found, or these are the new 0 days that have hit the market and you guys need to be patching, or these are the risks. And we have a community of followers, right, that pay attention to those disclosures now and are able to better protect themselves and get ahead of an attack. At least if we see something forming, like, for example, ransomware hit healthcare. We knew it hit healthcare because COVID was big. So we immediately created what we call warp speed action programs that allow those particular entities under risk to come into our cyber hygiene program first. We prioritized them first so that that didn't spread. And so whenever we see that trend, and this is where data insights really becomes essential, you're going to go there next to the data piece. Those insights become critical because we can put the investment, as Martin said, into those areas in the hopes that we catch it mid-flight or preemptively, or what we call left of boom.
Yeah, thanks, Esther. Well, the question about data was slightly different. It was one about, as governments kind of continue on their digital transformation programs, so as they start to link up data sets in new ways to create a more integrated service for the citizen, sharing that data is going to create new kind of problems and new
huge problems for us here in the United States, in that private companies do not want to share their data, not with other companies for competitive reasons. They don't want to share it with the government for the worry about Big Brother, right? And so this is why CISA lives in that unique space. I like to think of us as AARP. We're like the lobbyists for the retired persons, right? If you look at AARP, they're the biggest lobby in the United States with the largest membership, and that's what makes them immensely powerful. But AARP is nothing more than an advocacy on behalf of a certain population, right? And CISA can be very much that as well. We can be the advocates for making sure that we are protecting the nation by protecting the data. And to get to your point about sharing of that data, one of the things that we are doing is being very measured and very careful about how we store our data and who has access to it, and frankly, who can see what. And so we are highly compartmentalized in what we allow access to. We anonymize and normalize data and basically strip it of its attribution before we share it. That's kind of like basic principles for anything that we do. And quite frankly, we don't necessarily share data unless it's under very tight surveillance and protection with other folks. And I know that we've got some partnerships with the NCSC. So that's kind of a unique partnership where we are sharing data, and we're probably sharing sensitive data, and that's okay because this is a partnership. But generally, if a request for data is made, our principle is we want to share all the data we can, but we're going to do it safely. Yeah.
Thanks. You mentioned there strip it of its attributions, which Martin reminded me that I was going to ask you, why has this decision been taken now to kind of be more transparent about where these attacks are coming from? You mentioned that in your opening presentation, that you are, for example, saying when it's a Russian cyber attack in a way that we didn't before. What's the kind of thinking behind that? Martin, I'm coming to you on that one.
Not really my area, if I'm honest.
Okay.
So it's a decision that was reached by a broad group of people across government who were thinking about the impact that attribution would have. Would it help with the response? Would it help to deter? What are the wider political and international ramifications of it? To be blunt, being someone who works on the protection and response side, it doesn't make any difference to me.
Right. Okay. Asta, did you want to add anything on that point? I guess it's more political, really, isn't it? It's not really.
I guess it is, which is why I think I have the same hesitation to sort of answer, because I don't know that particular decision has been made on the side of the pond, as they say. But I think our global climate is perhaps tending us in that direction. And that's probably as far as I'll go to say on behalf of our agency. I think the awareness of what's happening in the world is out there. And I think facts speak for themselves. And I think, we just, we follow what's happening in that world, and we take action to what we think are the risks that are coming our way, right? As proactively as we can. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, I can't believe how fast the time has gone. I think we are coming to the close of the webinar now. I'm going to ask you both just one final thing in a moment, but just to say thank you to the audience for joining us today, and thank you again for Rubric Public Sector for being our knowledge partner with us here today. We will be sending a link around to everybody who registered for the event with the recording of this, so they'll all be able to see your house, Asta, as you go around your house. I'm really sorry that you had to struggle with this.
No, and I am sorry as well. I think
issues today. No, it's no problem. And we'll be sending a link anyway of an article as well with the key points that have arisen from this conversation, because you've both raised some really interesting and fascinating points, which I know will be helpful for the audience as well. So we'll be sending that round to everybody as well in a couple of weeks' time. But I just want to ask you both, bearing in mind that audience, and I think you've touched on this throughout the discussion today, but in terms of what you would like to leave the audience with, what's the kind of one or two things that you would like them to do when it comes to kind of thinking about their cybersecurity as they now leave this webinar? So I guess it's, what are those low-hanging fruits that every civil servant, public servant should be doing in their day-to-day kind of tasks? Ashta, I'll come to you first on this one.
I would say whether you're in the government or you're in the private sector, sign up for cyber hygiene. That is the easiest thing you can do. It is something we offer as a white glove service to a lot of folks. So we will work with you, whatever situation you're in, right? And so that's the nice thing about CISA, is that we'll meet you where you are. And the easiest thing you can do is just go to our website and drop us a desire to be in the program. And I think that email address is in my slide deck, but I can certainly share it with you. It's vulnerability@CISA.
We'll make sure we share that with everyone.
So it's very, very easy to drop us a line there. And what we do is we basically will begin enrolling you in the program. You will have to go through a little bit of documentation with us, but the intent is that's at minimum a way to see where you stand. And beyond that, I would say follow the basics. And I would say those are patching, phishing, and backups to protect yourself from ransomware, which is probably the most likely thing to come your way, especially if you're a small business or an agency and you're just not expecting it.
Thanks, Asta. Martin, what would you like to add to that?
Okay, so if you do nothing else, walk away from this and go, what are my responsibilities? What am I actually responsible for here? And then ask the question, right? Ask the question. Someone talks about multi-factor authentication. Why don't I have multi-factor authentication on these critical accounts that, I don't know, deal with public information or payments or whatever it might be? And the other one I think is the first time you run as an organization your business continuity plan, it'll fail. The first time you do it, it will fail. So have you really tested your business continuity plan? If you haven't, do it. because it's much better to have it fail in a planned way because you're testing it than when you really, really rely on it. So there you go. It's understand what you're responsible for, ask the dumb questions of the people who are providing those kinds of protection to get the basic protection in place. And if your organization hasn't tested the BC plan, suggest that you test the BC plan. And everyone will groan, but I can guarantee the benefit will be huge when you do it.
Yeah, much better to do it when you're not in an emergency situation than when you are. Brilliant. Thank you. Sadly, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Asta and Martin, for sharing your time, your experience, your expertise with us. Really interesting conversation. Lots of very practical advice, I think, which will be very helpful to the audience. I hope you've all enjoyed the conversation. There are some details of one of our other webinars coming up. So this is another webinar that we are doing next week. If you're interested in the tourism sector at all, this is about how government can help the SMEs in their post-pandemic recovery. But we have lots of webinars as well. Check out the Global Government Forum website for future webinars coming up. We will also be doing other webinars on kind of related issues to data, digital, cyber as well in future. So thank you, Martin. Thank you, Asta. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope we see you again very soon on one of our webinars. Have a very good rest of the day. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.